You always think you'll know. You think there'll be signs. Lipstick on a collar, some perfume that isn't yours, a shift in the way they kiss you goodnight. But when it finally happens to you, when the person you trusted most betrays you, it doesn't look like a movie. It's quieter, duller. It sneaks in through the cracks you didn't even know were there. For me, it started on a Tuesday. One of those days that doesn't mean anything until it does. I was sitting on the couch, still in my work shirt, tie loosened, one shoe off. Our dog, Theo, had jumped up next to me with his usual huff, like he was fed up with the world. My wife, Erin, was in the kitchen, singing quietly along to something on her playlist while making pasta. The smell of garlic and white wine sauce hung in the air. A normal night. So damn normal. Then her phone buzzed on the countertop. I wouldn't have even noticed if it weren't for the way she froze. Just for a second. A pause, barely noticeable. But in that pause, something changed. Like the air got heavier. She reached for it too quickly, too casually. That fake calm people use when they're trying not to seem guilty. I didn't say anything at first. Just watched. Who's texting you? I asked after a moment, keeping my voice light. Not accusing. Just curious. She smiled without looking at me. Work stuff. Rachel's being a drama queen again. And maybe that would have been enough. Maybe I would have let it go, if the phone didn't light up again. This time, I saw the name. Daniel. There's no Daniel at her job. I know her team. I've been to their holiday parties, their awkward happy hours. I've heard the stories. No Daniel. I didn't say anything then either. I just stood up, walked over, kissed her on the cheek, and said I was going to take Theo for a walk before dinner. I lied. I sat in the car, locked the doors, and just stared at the dashboard, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. I should have gone back inside, should have brushed it off. But there was a stone in my stomach now, cold, heavy, familiar in a way I didn't want to admit. Because here's the truth. I've seen what betrayal looks like. My father cheated on my mother when I was 14. She found out when he came home smelling like lavender soap and red wine. Same smell she wore, only it wasn't hers. I remember how she broke that night, how quiet she became afterward, how loud the silence was. I promised myself I'd never do what he did. Never lie, never betray, never be him. But I never once thought I'd end up on the other side of it. I opened my phone and started scrolling through old photos of Erin and me. I'm not proud of this next part, but I'm being honest with you. I guessed her passcode. It wasn't hard, her birthday. I waited until she was in the shower that night. Heart pounding, hands shaking, like I was the one doing something wrong. And maybe I was. Her phone opened, and I found myself in her messages app, scrolling past Mom, Rachel, Melissa, and there it was. Daniel. Just his name and a string of heart emojis in the preview. My throat closed. I clicked. I don't even know how to describe what I saw. There were messages, hundreds of them. Some flirty, some stupid, some vulgar in ways that made my ears burn. But what hurt the most were the simple ones. I miss you. Wish I was waking up next to you. This weekend was perfect. Perfect. It felt like someone had taken a bat to my chest. Like I'd just been hit by a car I never saw coming. I sat there on the edge of our bed, her damp towel hanging on the back of the door, her humming faintly through the bathroom fan, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't cry, couldn't move, couldn't think. I just sat there, reading every word, like they were written in blood. My blood. That night, I didn't confront her. I wish I could say I did. That I stormed into the bathroom, threw the phone at her, demanded answers. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled through dinner. Laughed at her story about her coworker tripping over a yoga ball, kissed her on the forehead before bed, and I laid awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when the woman I loved had become a stranger with my last name. One arm under the pillow, breathing soft and slow like a child. Peaceful, innocent almost. But I knew better now. I stared at her like I was trying to see the outline of the man who had touched her. Daniel. This invisible ghost who now lived in our house without ever stepping through the door. She stirred and turned over slowly, eyes still half closed. Morning, she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. Morning, I said, and kissed her like I meant it. She smiled at me. That smile. I used to live for it. Now it felt like a knife disguised as a memory. It's crazy how quickly things shift once you know. Suddenly, every detail feels like a clue. Every action, every word, becomes a piece of evidence in a case you never wanted to investigate. That morning, I watched her get dressed. Same routine. Hair in a bun. Light makeup. Navy blouse with the little pearl buttons I bought her 2 Christmases ago. She hummed while brushing her teeth. Meanwhile, my stomach twisted itself into knots. I drove her to work. She kissed me on the cheek before getting out, her hand lingering on my arm just a second too long. "I love you," she said, with eyes so calm it almost made me doubt what I'd seen. I forced a smile. "Love you too." And that's when the game began, the fake smile game. She played it better than me. Effortless. Like she'd been practicing. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd been faking long before I knew. I, on the other hand, was falling apart quietly. At work, I sat through meetings hearing nothing, nodding like a puppet. On the drive home, I rehearsed confrontation speeches I never gave. That night, I told her I had a headache and went to bed early. I didn't. I just wanted to be alone. I wanted the space to replay every detail of the texts I'd read, again and again, like some sick documentary on repeat. I didn't sleep. Again. By Friday, I was unraveling. I started watching her phone habits. How she smiled at her screen. How she tilted it ever so slightly away from me. She never used to do that. Never used to guard it like it was a loaded gun. I started doing things I'm not proud of. Checking her call logs. Watching when she was online. Noting the times she left the room to check on the laundry or call Rachel. I wasn't just suspicious. I was obsessed. Paranoid. Spiraling. But here's the worst part. I still loved her. God, I still loved her. Even knowing what she'd done. Even picturing them together. His hands on her. His lips saying the same things she once whispered to me. I couldn't flip the switch. Couldn't stop loving her. And that made me feel even weaker. One night, I was doing the dishes while she scrolled on the couch. I heard her laugh at something, then saw her type fast, thumbs flying. It wasn't to me. I hadn't gotten a message from her all day. I dried my hands, walked over, and stood behind her just long enough for her to notice. She locked the screen. "Quick. Everything okay?" I asked. She glanced up, innocent eyes. "Yeah, just Rachel being a nut." I nodded, then walked away before my mouth betrayed me. That weekend, I cracked. Saturday morning, I told her I needed to go help my brother with something. Another lie. I parked near a cafe and sat there with a notebook. I needed to make sense of it all. I started writing everything down. Every suspicious moment, every lie I had let slide. And somewhere in the middle of that scribbled chaos, a new thought crept in. Who is Daniel? I had no last name. No photos. Just a phone number and a trail of messages. I knew what they said, how often they talked, even that they had met in person at least twice. One message said, "I can still smell you on my jacket." But I didn't know who he was. And suddenly, I needed to. Not for closure. Not for revenge. For truth. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about how I had no idea who I'd married. I used to think heartbreak was loud. You know, like yelling, slamming doors, shattered glass. But it's not. It's quiet. Methodical. It creeps up on you while you're brushing your teeth or tying your shoes. It whispers while you're doing the dishes. It waits until you're alone and then slides up beside you, resting its head on your shoulder like an old friend. By Monday, I'd stopped pretending I wasn't falling apart. I couldn't focus at work. Couldn't sleep without seeing her fingers typing, "I miss you," to someone else. Couldn't walk past her perfume without tasting bile. And worst of all, I couldn't look in the mirror. Because the man staring back wasn't me. He was smaller, duller, like someone had drained the color out of his skin. He looked like a man who'd lost control of his own life, but was still pretending to drive the car. That's when I decided I wasn't going to wait anymore. If she was going to keep lying to my face, I'd find the truth myself. So I did what any broken, humiliated, desperate man does. I went full detective. The first step was stupid, but it worked. I opened her phone again. Same passcode. She never changed it. Part of me wondered if she wanted to be caught. This time, I went deeper. Dug through her photo backups, cloud storage, hidden folders. Nothing too revealing. She wasn't sloppy, but there were a few shots that didn't belong. A wine glass across the table. Her reflection in a hotel bathroom mirror. A text at 2:04 a.m. on a Thursday that read, "I can't stop thinking about Saturday." That was the clue. Saturday. I checked our shared calendar. That Saturday, she told me she was going to a wellness retreat with her friends. I remembered it well because she came back tan, relaxed, and smelling like eucalyptus. I also remembered her forgetting to take the receipt out of her gym bag. One Google search told me that Zen Springs Wellness Retreat didn't exist, but the hotel she stayed at did. And that's where I found him. The name on the reservation wasn't hers. It was Daniel K. Rios. The room was booked under his name. 2 guests. 1 night. King bed. Paid in full. I sat there staring at the screen like it had insulted me. My heart was racing, but I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel anything, really. I was just cold. Dead. Like my body was moving on autopilot. Now I had a name. A full one. And this is where it got dark. I used everything I could, social media, people search sites, even a throwaway Reddit post in a private sleuthing sub. Took me 2 hours to find his LinkedIn, his Instagram. And this part felt like a cruel joke, his wedding photos. Yeah, Daniel Rios was married. Happily, if you believe filtered smiles and curated captions. His wife's name was Madison. They had a dog. Lived 40 minutes away. Posted anniversary photos just 2 months ago. I stared at that photo. Daniel in a navy blue suit. Madison in a lace gown. Her arms wrapped around him like she didn't know. Because she didn't. Just like me. He was living a double life too. 2 houses. 2 beds. 2 people blindly loving liars. I remember laughing. A dry, bitter sound that startled even me. Because suddenly, it wasn't just heartbreak. It was rage. Not just at Aaron, but at him. At both of them for making me feel like I was the one losing my mind. That night, I didn't speak a word to Erin. I watched her dance around the kitchen like nothing was wrong. She made us margaritas. Wore that sundress I used to love. I hated how good she was at pretending. And then she did something I didn't expect. She leaned in, kissed me softly, and whispered, "We should go somewhere soon. Just the 2 of us." I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time, I saw the lie beneath the skin. I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "We really should." But I wasn't talking about a vacation. You know how they say, don't shoot the messenger? Yeah. Well, when your entire life's been blown apart, that rule doesn't feel like it applies anymore. Not when you're staring at a photo of the man your wife's been sleeping with. Not when he's got a wife of his own. Not when you realize someone else is out there living the same nightmare and has no idea. That's what got me. She didn't know. Madison Rios, brown eyes, yoga instructor, golden retriever named Finn, perfect teeth. She was out there right now, probably making dinner for a man who came home from screwing my wife. I told myself I wanted to protect her. But the truth? I think I just didn't want to be alone in this anymore. It took me 2 days to work up the nerve. I found her email through a contact form on her wellness blog. I hesitated. Sat there staring at the blinking cursor for almost an hour before typing. "Hi Madison. I know this is going to sound strange, but I believe your husband Daniel may be involved with my wife. I'm not looking to start drama or make accusations. I just think you deserve to know. If you'd be willing to talk, I can send you proof." Jason, my finger hovered over send. Once I clicked, there'd be no undoing it. No pretending I hadn't shattered the illusion for someone else. But I also knew what it felt like to live in that illusion. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I hit send. Then I closed my laptop and sat there with my head in my hands, wondering if I'd just started a war. She responded 6 hours later. "Hi Jason, I don't really know what to say. Are you sure? I need to see whatever you have. Please." Madison, the next day, I sent screenshots. Messages. Hotel booking confirmation. A blurry reflection of Aaron in a bathroom mirror I had confirmed was from the hotel in question. I didn't send everything. I'm not cruel. But I sent enough. She didn't respond for 2 days. I assumed she blocked me. Or hated me. Or maybe she was sitting in the same place I had been a week earlier. Curled up in bed, heart pounding, reading words she couldn't unsee. Then I got the message. "Can we talk? In person?" We met at a coffee shop 30 minutes from both our homes. Neutral ground. I spotted her immediately. She looked exactly like her photos, but paler, like she hadn't slept. Her fingers trembled around a paper cup. I walked up, cautious. "Madison." She looked up, stood, and gave a tight smile. "Jason." "Hey." We sat down across from each other, 2 strangers with a shared wound. And for a moment we just sat. Then she exhaled. "So it's true." I nodded. "I'm sorry," I said. "And I meant it. God, I meant it." She shook her head, blinking fast. "You don't have to apologize. You didn't do this." Then her eyes filled, just a little, and she added, "He was at a conference that weekend." I didn't say anything. What do you say to someone who's realizing their life is a lie? She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. I went through his messages. He deleted them all, but I found a rideshare receipt, the hotel, and a photo of Aaron from. Her voice broke. From the mirror. Same dress. She stopped and looked at me. Do you think they love each other? That question hit me harder than any of the rest, because I'd asked myself the same thing 100 times. At 2 a.m., at the dinner table, while watching Aaron laugh at a show we used to love, I answered honestly, I don't know, but I know they lied to us. She nodded. Then she said something that changed everything. What are we going to do about it? I didn't expect that. Didn't expect her to sit up straighter, to wipe her tears, to look at me not like a victim, but like a partner in something deeper. I looked at her, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel powerless. We could confront them, I said slowly. Together. Madison's eyes lit up just a little. Or, she said, we could get creative. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes after heartbreak. Like the fog finally lifts, and all the illusions you've clung to start burning away, one by one. That moment when you stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what am I going to do about it? Madison and I sat in that cafe for 3 hours. At first, we just compared notes, cross-referencing lies, timelines, excuses we'd been fed. She told me about a weekend Daniel claimed to be in Denver, a business expo, but he posted no pictures. Came home sunburned. I told her about Aaron's yoga retreat that had no group photos, no itinerary, no proof it even existed. They covered their tracks, I said. She nodded, but not well enough. Then there was a pause. One of those heavy silences that says more than a full paragraph could. And Madison leaned in across the table, voice barely above a whisper. Do you want to destroy them? It didn't sound angry. It sounded surgical. I didn't answer right away. That kind of question lives in a dangerous place between impulse and intention. But the truth? Yes. Yes, I did. Not because I wanted to hurt them. Because I wanted them to feel what we felt. To have the mirror held up. To watch their world unravel thread by thread like ours did. So we started building something neither of us had the words for yet. Not revenge. Not justice. Something messier. More personal. The plan started small. We agreed not to say anything to them yet. We'd keep pretending, watching, smiling through the lies until we were ready. We'd gather more evidence. We'd track them, understand the pattern. Because there was a pattern. People are lazy in their deceit, and routine is the enemy of secrecy. Madison installed a location-sharing app on Daniel's phone while he was in the shower. I bought a cheap burner phone and used it to message Aaron anonymously, posing as a hotel survey rep. She replied with an emoji. They weren't being careful anymore. They thought they were safe. We were their shadows now. But here's where it gets complicated. The more time I spent planning with Madison, the more I noticed things. The way her mouth tightened when she talked about the lies. The way she laughed bitterly and then stopped herself like she was ashamed of it. She was sharp, smart, and far more composed than I was. And yet, one night, as we sat in her car outside a coffee shop, watching Daniel's phone move on the map toward the west side of town, where Aaron happened to be meeting her co-workers for dinner, Madison turned to me and said, You ever wonder if we should just let them go? Forget the whole thing. I didn't answer, because I had wondered, but not for the reason she meant. I wondered if I could still look at Aaron the same way after this, even if she begged, even if she cried. I wondered if love had a limit, or if betrayal simply erases it like chalk in the rain. Madison turned back to the windshield. I want to forgive him sometimes, she whispered. And then I see that blue dot moving across the map, and I remember I'm just one of his lives. It hit me then. That's what this all was. Not about cheating. Not even about lies. It was about being replaced. Reduced. Made disposable. The plan escalated in week 2. We decided on a dinner. All 4 of us. One table. No secrets. Madison would suggest it to Daniel. A double date. Just for fun. You haven't seen Jason and Aaron in so long. I would suggest the same to Aaron. Let's reconnect with old friends. They wouldn't see it coming. Because cheaters live in 2 realities. And they never expect their broken worlds to collide in plain sight. We picked a restaurant with white tablecloths and dim lighting. Neutral. Classy. Intimate. Judgment Day in 3 courses. Madison called it the reveal. I called it closure. We agreed to record everything. Every glance. Every fidget. Every lie told before the truth hit them between the ribs. But the night before the dinner, something strange happened. I got a text from Aaron at midnight. I can't sleep. Thinking about us. Do you still love me? I stared at that screen for a long time. And for a second, just a second, I felt that old ache again. That part of me that still remembered the sound of her laugh when she was mine. Before the rot set in. But that part was dying. And tomorrow, it would be buried. There's a unique kind of silence right before impact. Not the absence of sound. No, it's worse than that. It's the silence that knows what's coming. Like the air itself is holding its breath. That's what it felt like as I buttoned my shirt that night, hands trembling, mind spiraling. The dinner was at 7 o'clock. A little Italian place downtown that Erin had always loved. She used to say it reminded her of our honeymoon in Florence. Ironic, really, considering what we were about to do there. I looked at myself in the mirror before we left. Suit. Clean shave. Calm face. Liar. She was glowing. Erin came downstairs in a red dress I hadn't seen in months. Tight in the waist. Low at the back. Lipstick just right. Her perfume hit me like a memory I didn't want. You look amazing, I said, because that's what she expected. You clean up nice too. She smiled, kissing my cheek. I felt her lips and thought, he's kissed those too. He's touched that dress. Maybe unzipped it. And yet I smiled back. Because tonight, the curtain would fall. We arrived first. Madison was already there, seated at the far booth, wine in hand. Her composure was terrifyingly good. She stood as we walked in, hugged Erin like nothing was wrong, shook my hand like a stranger, like she hadn't spent the last 2 weeks planning this with me. I followed her lead. Erin smiled at Daniel as he entered behind us, casual, confident. He even slapped me on the back like we were old college buddies. He was taller than I expected, cleaner cut, a type. I wanted to break his teeth. Instead, I poured him a glass of wine. The first 20 minutes were normal, painfully normal. We made small talk about work, weather, movies. Daniel told a story about a client mishap. Erin laughed too hard. Madison nodded along, sipping slowly, eyes unreadable. I watched them. I watched how Erin looked at him when she thought I wasn't looking. How Daniel let his knee graze hers under the table, just once. Barely a touch. But I saw it. I saw everything. And Madison did too. She gave me a tiny glance. Barely a flicker. It was time. I set down my fork, wiped my mouth, and looked at Erin. Hey babe, I said, calm as anything. Remember that weekend you were at the yoga retreat? She blinked. Yeah. The one where you stayed at that cabin in Mendocino with Rachel and Melissa? She nodded. That was so relaxing. I turned to Daniel. And you were in Denver, right? Big conference. He grinned. Hellish travel, but yeah. I nodded, then leaned back in my chair and said, that's weird. Silence. Erin tilted her head. What do you mean? I looked directly at her now. Because I booked the hotel you stayed in that weekend. Under Daniel's name. Madison spoke next, her voice low and sharp. And I tracked Daniel's phone. He never went to Denver. He went to Mendocino. It was like the whole room tilted. Erin froze. Daniel's glass slipped slightly in his hand. No one spoke. Then Madison leaned forward, setting her napkin on the table, eyes locked on her husband. I know about the texts, the photos, the weekends, all of it. Erin looked at me, her face colorless. You went through my phone? Don't make this about that, I said, suddenly louder than I meant to be. Don't you dare make me the villain right now. Daniel stood up. We should talk about this somewhere else. Madison didn't even flinch. No, Daniel. You wanted to lie in public. Now you can squirm in public too. People were starting to glance over. A waiter paused near the bar. Erin's hands were shaking now. Her voice came out in a whisper. Jason, I'm sorry. I know, I said. You don't get to say that yet. Madison stood. I think we're done here, she said. Daniel opened his mouth, but she cut him off. If you come home tonight, your stuff will be on the lawn. She looked at me. You want a ride? I nodded. We walked out together. Didn't say a word. Erin didn't follow. In the car, Madison gripped the wheel, breathing hard. And then, out of nowhere, she laughed. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of laugh that leaks out when your whole world catches fire and you realize all you can do is roast marshmallows in the flames. I laughed too, because what else was there? The day after the dinner, my house was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like the walls were holding their breath. I woke up on the couch. My neck hurt. My back hurt. Everything hurt. Erin hadn't come home. Or if she did, she left before sunrise. I wasn't sure which, and I didn't care enough to check. For the first time in weeks, I had nothing to hide. But instead of feeling lighter, I just felt hollow. No rage. No vindication. Just that dull ache behind my eyes that hadn't gone away since the night I opened her phone. I looked around the room, at all the framed pictures on the wall. Erin and me at the beach, Erin and me at her cousin's wedding, Aaron and me at that vineyard with the tastings and live jazz. Smiles everywhere. White teeth and summer tans. Proof of a story that used to be true. I pulled one down, looked at it for a long time, then smashed it into the trash can without a word. Madison texted me around noon. He came home last night. Tried to explain everything. Didn't say sorry. Just lied some more. He's gone now. I told him to take the dog with him. I didn't want Finn to watch me cry. I stared at the screen for a while. Typed, erased, typed again. Finally settled on, "You okay?" She responded almost instantly. "No, but that's not the goal right now." That hit me. That's not the goal right now. She wasn't wrong. When you survive a bomb like that, the first step isn't healing. It's stabilizing the ground beneath you. Making sure the house isn't going to collapse entirely before you even start rebuilding. I spent the next few days in that space. Somewhere between ruin and reaction. Erin didn't try to talk to me. At least not at first. She sent one message 3 days after the dinner. "Can we talk? Just once. Please?" I didn't respond. Because I didn't know what she wanted. Forgiveness? Closure? A way to spin what happened into some kind of "it just happened" story? I didn't trust her to tell me the truth anymore. And worse, I didn't trust myself not to want to believe her. But the silence didn't last. On the 5th day, she came home while I was in the kitchen, standing in front of the open fridge and staring at food I didn't have the appetite to eat. "Jason," she said quietly. I turned. She looked smaller, older, like the weight of what she'd done had finally started pressing down on her bones. "I'm not here to defend anything," she said. I need you to know it wasn't about love." I let the fridge door close. She kept going. "I was lonely. You were always working. I felt invisible. I know that doesn't make it right. God, it doesn't. But it wasn't about him. It was about me. About how I felt." I laughed once. Cold. Short. "That's funny," I said. "Because while you were busy feeling invisible, I was busy trying to keep this house running. Keep us running." She wiped her face. I know that now." Silence stretched between us like a chasm. Then she added something I didn't expect. "I think I wanted to get caught." I stared at her. I didn't know how to end it. I hated myself every time I left the house. Every time I told you I was going to yoga or dinner or whatever. I kept waiting for it to blow up. And then when it finally did, part of me. She stopped herself, voice cracking. Part of me felt relieved. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. That night, I drove to Madison's. Not to talk, just to sit. She opened the door, saw my face, and didn't ask any questions. She handed me a drink and sat beside me on her porch. We stared at the night sky like two people who'd just made it through a hurricane, unsure if the next gust of wind would take us out completely. "Do you regret it?" I finally asked. "Regret what?" "Telling them. Exposing it." She thought for a second. "I regret who I married," she said. Then, "But I don't regret tearing the curtain down." Neither did I. Erin slept in the guest room that week. We barely spoke. But one morning, I caught her watching me from the hallway, like she was trying to memorize me before I slipped through her fingers. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Sometimes there's nothing left to say. Not because the words aren't there, but because the damage is louder. You think there's going to be a big moment. Some cinematic scene where you finally know what to do, where the fog clears and you realize, yes, this is the right decision. But it doesn't come like that. It comes quietly, in fragments, in the way you don't reach for her hand when you pass by, in the way you look at the couch and remember where she sat while texting him, in the way the house starts to feel like it's just walls and furniture instead of home. That's how it happened for me. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The guest room door stayed closed for a week. I left it that way. We didn't argue. We didn't fight. We were too exhausted to scream. Sometimes I think the silence after betrayal is even more painful than the discovery itself. At least when you're yelling, there's still something to fight for. But silence, that's surrender. One night, I caught her at the kitchen table with a pen and notepad. She didn't hear me come in. She was writing something over and over, crossing it out, starting again. "Letters," she said without looking up. "To you." "To myself." I thought if I could put it on paper, maybe it would make sense. I didn't respond. I just poured some water and stood there. She finally looked up. "I don't expect you to forgive me." Good, I thought. "I just want to know if you ever loved me." I took a sip before answering. "I did. More than you'll ever understand." And that was the truth. That's what made it hurt the most. Madison and I kept in touch. Nothing inappropriate. No lines crossed. We weren't turning into them. but we were orbiting the same crater, and that gave us a strange kind of bond. She told me Daniel had moved into a short-term rental, said he kept sending long, rambling texts about therapy, childhood wounds, and how it wasn't really cheating if it meant something. She blocked him. I hope he finds what he's looking for, she said to me. But I hope he finds it alone. I started looking at apartments. Didn't tell Aaron right away. I needed time to let the idea solidify, to feel like it was mine. Not a reaction, not revenge, but a choice. One afternoon, I stood in an empty studio on the east side of the city. Small kitchen, no dishwasher. A cracked window that let in too much wind. But it was mine. It didn't have ghosts in the walls. It didn't smell like her perfume. It didn't whisper you were never enough every time I walked through the door. When I told Erin I was leaving, she didn't cry. She just nodded. Is there someone else? She asked quietly. I almost laughed. You think I'm you? I said. She winced. I had to ask. No, I said. There's no one else. Just not you anymore. She asked if she could help me pack. I let her. Because I needed to see it. To see the thing we built be dismantled, box by box. There was something therapeutic in that. Something final. She held up an old photo of us at the lake. Sunburnt, drunk, laughing at nothing. You were so happy, she said. No. I replied, looking at my own eyes in the picture. I just didn't know yet. I moved out the next day. Theo, our dog, stayed with her. I wanted him, but I couldn't separate them. He loved her too, and I was tired of ripping things apart. The first night in the apartment was rough. I drank too much, ate cereal out of the box, sat on the floor, and listened to silence louder than I'd ever heard. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't heartbroken, but because I was finally empty. And emptiness doesn't have tears, just space. And in that space, I started to breathe again. Grief has a way of fooling you. At first, it screams. It wakes you up in the middle of the night, grabs you by the throat, and forces you to relive everything. But later, when it's quieter, it becomes something else. It becomes routine. You wake up alone. You make coffee. You fold your laundry. And at some point, you realize you're not waiting for her keys in the door anymore. You're just living. And it's the strangest thing. That kind of quiet after the chaos. It feels almost violent in its stillness. 2 weeks into living alone, I started sleeping again. Not great sleep, just enough to dream, sometimes. Dreams where Erin still smiled like she did before things fell apart. Dreams where I wasn't checking her phone in secret. Where we were just us, simple, soft, stupid in love. And every time I woke up, I'd feel that familiar ache in my chest. Not fresh pain, but scar tissue pulling in the cold. I missed who I thought she was. That's the part no one talks about. You don't just lose the person. You lose the version of them you built in your head. The one who would never do what they did. The one who existed only in your trust. Madison and I met for lunch a few weeks later. No agenda. Just checking in. She looked better. Softer around the edges. She said she was seeing a therapist. Doing yoga again. Cooking meals for one and learning how to like it. I forgot how much of myself I gave away, she said. Piece by piece. Until there was barely anything left that was mine. I understood that more than I could say. There's a kind of intimacy in that shared pain. Not romantic. Not codependent. Just honest. The kind you only get after surviving something together. We sat on a park bench afterward, watching kids play near the fountain. She turned to me and said, "Do you think we'll ever trust again?" I didn't answer right away. I said slowly, we'll trust differently. Not blindly. Not recklessly. But maybe that's not a bad thing. She nodded, then smiled. Softly, the kind that doesn't need to be big to feel real. I got a letter from Erin not long after that. A real one. Pen and paper. No text message, no email. It sat unopened on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I didn't want to read it at first. I was afraid it would pull me back under. Afraid it would make me miss her again in a way I couldn't control. But on the 4th day, I opened it. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to rewrite the past. She just told the truth. How she never thought she was capable of hurting someone the way she hurt me. How she wakes up every morning with guilt in her throat. How she hopes one day I'll find someone who doesn't confuse love with need. She ended it with, "You didn't deserve what I did to you, but I think you deserve what comes next. And I hope it's beautiful." I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Not to revisit. Not to cling to. But because it felt like a closed chapter, and I wanted a place to store it before I moved on. I wish I could say I woke up the next day healed. I didn't. But I did wake up without that familiar heaviness. And that felt like something. I went for a run that morning. First one in months. Air cold in my lungs. Heart pounding. Music in my ears. I ran until my legs burned and my thoughts couldn't keep up. And somewhere along the way, I smiled. Not because I was over it, but because I was still here. Still standing. Still choosing to breathe. And that felt like peace. Or something like it. They say closure is a myth. A fairy tale we tell ourselves to make chaos feel tidy. Like if we just find the last piece, everything will make sense. But what no one tells you is that sometimes the last piece doesn't bring peace. It brings the truth. And sometimes that's worse. It started with a missed call. Unknown number. No voicemail. I ignored it. Then another one. Same area code. Then a text. Jason, my name is Avery. I don't know how to say this. I'm Daniel's sister. Can we talk? I stared at the screen. My first thought was, why now? My second was, what else could possibly be left to say? I replied 2 hours later. We met at a bookstore cafe in the middle of the city. Public. Neutral. The kind of place where bad news can feel soft, wrapped in lattes and indie playlists. Avery was mid-30s, sharp eyes, the same tired sadness I saw in Madison's face that first day. She didn't waste time. I know what happened, she said. Daniel told me everything. I leaned back, not sure what everything means anymore. She nodded. That's fair. I wouldn't believe him either. But I don't think you have the full story. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? She took a deep breath. Daniel didn't meet your wife randomly. He wasn't just some guy who stumbled into her life. He sought her out. I froze. What? He knew who Erin was. Before they met. He found her through you. I laughed, confused, tense. Through me? She nodded. He recognized you from a photo. Your company published a feature last year. He read it. Said you'd been promoted, bought a house, had the perfect life. He became obsessed. Not with Erin. With ruining you. I was silent. Not because I didn't believe her, but because deep down, a part of me did. Daniel was too calculated. Too clean. Too convenient. He used Erin, she said. Fed her exactly what she needed to hear. Played the long game. Made her think it was love. She was just the tool. I felt something shift in my chest. Like the floor beneath me cracked just a little more. Avery looked at me, serious and sincere. I'm not saying she's innocent. She made her choices. But he manipulated her. He wanted to hurt you. To see if he could destroy something beautiful. That's who he is. I stared down at the table, throat tight. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I saw what it did to you. To Madison. To everyone. And because I didn't say anything sooner. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, it would go away. But it didn't. I nodded. Once. Then asked, why me? She hesitated. He said you reminded him of everything he couldn't be. Stable. Trusted. Respected. You were the life he thought he deserved. I walked out of that cafe into the cold air, dizzy. The betrayal I thought I knew? It was just a mask. Underneath, it was something more twisted. More intentional. It wasn't just that Erin cheated. It was that she was chosen. Used. Broken. And somehow, even in that, I didn't feel relief. I felt something else. Grief. Not for her. Not for us. But for the version of my life that was stolen before I even knew it was under attack. I never told Erin about Avery. Maybe I should have. Maybe she deserved to know she was manipulated. But maybe she already knew. Or maybe that was her last lie. Months later, I saw Madison again. We were different people now. Lighter in some ways. Heavier in others. We had coffee. Talked about work, books, life. She smiled at one point and said, "You look better." I smiled back. I feel real. That was the word I'd been looking for. Not healed. Not whole. Just real. Everything after betrayal is about choosing what gets to stay. What gets left behind. And that day, sitting across from someone who'd also survived the wreckage, I realized some things don't need a clean ending. They just need truth. Even if the truth hurts. Even if it leaves a scar.